Hello, this is Jay Mitchell, and we are back for another episode of the Libertarian Uncensored podcast, going over all the posts on Libertarian Uncensored subreddit. Let's get right into it. So first we have Marjorie Taylor Greene's complete track record on LGBTQ issues from unclosetedmedia.com, posted by Knee Concussions, and that was an article they wrote for, Uncloseted Media. And yeah, personally, it's quite the wall of text, so I'm not going to read all of it. But I did make a post about it on the Libertarian Party USA subreddit. I said Libertarian perspectives on altering text. It sounds like kind of a niche topic, but it's definitely one I think is increasingly important in the age of social media. So related today, an old Reddit acquaintance of mine posted this article they wrote on Marjorie Taylor Greene. The article itself is nothing too special. It's kind of like if you put "Why is Marjorie Taylor Greene anti-LGBTQ" into ChatGPT and copy pasted the results. The following segment caught my eye though. March 3rd, 2025. In February, Illinois Republican Mary Miller misgenders McBride while speaking on the House floor. A month later, the transcript of the event is amended to reflect McBride's pronouns. Green Post text that the official House record being edited was unacceptable and added McBride is a man. Regardless of how your feelings about McBride, I definitely don't think that they should have amended the official congressional record to change it so someone was marked as saying something that they didn't. If they wanted to add it as a footnote, I think that would be fine, but to do something more defeats the entire purpose of having an official congressional record in the first place. It reminds me of the Roald Dahl revision controversy from a few years ago when they attempted to have sensitivity reviewers write the original works that Dahl put out, yet still market them as if they were the original stories. I think a fair compromise in that situation would be to do it in addition to the Canterbury Tales I read in college did. On one page they had the original text as Chaucer initially wrote it in Middle English, and on the other page they had how it would be written in Modern English. Of course, as libertarian, people wanted this by editing or otherwise altering their own text. I think they should be able to do so, but I definitely think there should be an indication that it was edited, kind of like how Reddit has an asterisk next to edited comments. Ultimately, like with every other issue, people are going to justify what they justify regardless. Though thoughts, and yeah, personally, I think I would agree with all that. Of course, I was the one who said all that, so I probably would agree with it. I did say it a few days ago though, so maybe people aren't probably going to change their thoughts and opinions that fast. So yeah, personally, I think if people do want to edit their posts and comments on social media, they should be able to. But ultimately, I do think social media platforms should market that's not the original comment, like Reddit and X it seemed to do. Well, Reddit has its asterisks, and Twitter has something that says, "Oh, this post or comment has since been updated." I think whenever someone changes their a tweet, if they have the ability to edit them because if they have the blue check mark. And yeah, personally, ultimately, people are going to justify though, regardless of what rules a social media platform has. And that's my thoughts there. They also did another post to the Libertarian Party USA subreddit. I said Libertarian perspectives on daylight saving time. And I said, now that I think about it, this is arguing with the least libertarian things to do with government, and a handful of others does. The government should not be dictating what time it is, no matter how well intentioned. Time should be strictly a biological matter that the government should not be involved in, just like pretty much everything else. If people want to observe DST, I think they should be able to, but in many ways, anything related to matters of time is inherently going to be forced collectivism, since that's how stuff like schedules work. You can't just show up an hour late for work, for instance, because you aren't observing DST and your employer is, and vice versa. Thoughts? I also added, then this one guy, Phil Rob Diaz, replied, "There's nothing stopping you from saying your own time. Just you can even convince people that's the best. With DST, the government's not saying the official government clocks are this time. You also don't have to call it the Gulf of America Department of War." And I said that response. In theory, that's correct, but in practice, time, money, you can probably add language in it as they're in that category as well, are going to usually end up having extremely centralized systems for ease of access between people. It's not like something like building a non-traditionally shaped building on your own property. You are at the mercy of what society as a whole tends to accept. And that's my thoughts there. Next we have Massey slams Patel over no sex trafficking files claims after Alexander Brothers conviction, posted by Jolly Porcupine, and that's a screenshot of Thomas Massey tweets that they shared. The Alexander Brothers appeared in the Epstein files by first name. By notice, DOJ redacted their last name in an FBI email containing EFTA 01660679, but FBI Director Cash had no evidence of sex trafficking the files, and he links to an article from NPR and an article from Justice.gov. And yeah, personally, if the government wants to cover for anyone, ultimately they are in a position to do so. The U.S. Congress demanded that they release the Epstein files in full, but the executive branch has shown that it can pretty much ignore anything that the legislative or judicial branches say, and oftentimes there's really nothing you can do about it. I personally don't think that's how it should be. But ultimately, power is ultimately going to be in the hands of whatever people are willing to, whoever has is willing to justify, and a lot of the power in the U.S. federal government is in the executive branch. Well, I think but it's also, I would say it's really in the alphabet agencies in the I don't know what the branch they are, but I guess they're probably mostly executive branches, well, like FBI or CIA. But ultimately, I would say the power is ultimately going to be with whoever has the ability to do what. Ultimately, that's what life is. Whoever has the resources and social and economic capital to get away with whatever they want to can get away with whatever they want to, and oftentimes there's nothing you can do about it. Next, we have Lindsey Graham says, "I'm not with you. I'm with Israel into my dying day," posted by Ragnar OKXG. And that's a cross post from the Underreported News subreddit. And I guess that's a clip of Lindsey Graham saying that on Fox News. And yeah, personally, I think if Lindsey Graham is so with Israel, he should be out. He should be out in the front lines of the Iran war. But of course, he's never gonna do that. Ultimately, he's just one of those the war hawk neocons who Trump was marketing himself as trying to replace, even though Trump ended up pretty much being the exact same neocon. He pretty much ended up just being edgy George W. Bush. Hopefully, the neocons will get kicked out of power one day, but at this point, I sincerely doubt it. I think J.D. Vance might end up being a secret neocon as well, and if he doesn't run, then open neocon Marco Rubio is probably going to run as instead. So ultimately, hopefully we can get the neocons and their foreign interventionist foreign policy out. But ultimately, I don't know how realistic that is. Trump marketed himself as being the anti-neocon in 2016. But he was just saying that he didn't end up doing any meaningful change to the U.S. foreign policy. If anything, the USA is even more foreign interventionist under Trump than it was under Bush and Obama before him. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have Trump tells Republicans the Save America Act will guarantee the midterms from thehill.com, posted by Donald Key. And that's a cross post from the law subreddit. And yeah, personally, I don't know how likely the Save America Act is to pass. But, ultimately, if they want to justify passing it, we should be able to. Of course, Reddit's not going to like it because they think voter ID is racist. I personally think, any forced collectivist system is voting, they can set whatever rules they want to, and oftentimes there's nothing you can do about it. That's why I think the libertarian position is you got to get rid of the forced collectivist systems of voting entirely. I think if people want to vote among voluntary collectives, I think that's fine. But when you get to countries like the U.S. with over 300 million people, not everyone can consent to every election, and I think that's important to remember as well. So I think that's the libertarian position on the issue. Next, we have Based or Not, posted by Zivlar, and that's some screenshots they shared from the neo-medievalist.github.io. So the libertarian values test, it looks like. And yeah, it looks like they're just stats on like stuff like authority versus anarchy, hierarchy versus heterarchy, planning versus markets, collectivism versus individualism, extreme libertarian unionists versus personally, I would say that if they want to share this test driving, that's fine. Because there's so many political tests out there these days that each one's trying to sell something. And ultimately, take whatever political test you want to. But ultimately, I do think politics needs to come from within rather than what some test result says that you have. And that's my thoughts on that issue. And yeah, it looks like it says they're a moderatism libertarian. Moderatism is an idea that says balance, pragmatism, and gradual form of radical change. It values compromise, political stability, and practical solutions, seeking to harmonize competing social, economic, and political interests while avoiding extremes. Yeah, that sounds decent. Ultimately, people should, if people don't want to be extreme, they should be able to. But as Barry Goldwater says, extremism in the defense of liberty is no vice. I think that's important to remember as well. Next, we have Trump's new tariff plan still asserts a crisis that does not exist, from Reason.com, posted by Jedi Porcupine. And yeah, personally, if Trump wants to say there's a crisis, he should be able to. If the media outlet like Reason says the crisis doesn't exist, they should be able to as well. Ultimately, what constitutes a crisis is going to be at the discretion of whoever's in power. And I think that's important to remember as well. Next, we have new Trump statue pops up on the National Mall and will have you cringing big time from HuffPost.com, posted by Ninja Lover. And yeah, personally, I don't think that you should be putting Trump statues up on the National Mall, but ultimately people should be are going to justify if they don't put up a pro-Trump or anti-Trump statue. Ultimately, if they have the ability to do so, they can justify doing so. But with that being said, a lot of the time the government's just going to take it down, especially if it's on government property. Next, we have Texas Senate race, very interesting, posted by Dina B. Free. And they said a few incumbent Republicans have been losing in Texas, and John Cornyn, the incumbent senator, is at risk. Close neck and neck with James Talarico right now, and he couldn't even beat his primary challenger, another entrenched Republican asshole, Ken Paxton. There is a round scheduled for May 26th. Both candidates have bragged extensively about how loyal they are to Trump and how much they love him, but Trump hasn't endorsed either one and is dragging his feet making the endorsement he promised to make, obviously waiting for more polls. If Talarico wins, that'll be a huge upset. Cornyn has been in there forever. And yeah, personally, I don't know how likely it is Talarico is to win. Reddit will probably think he's going to win since he has a D next to its name. Reddit thinks the D's are always going to take Texas. Make blue Texas. But personally, I do think with the Republicans as divided as they are, and Talarico, already have taken the Democratic nomination, maybe he can take it. But, I do think, I've been seeing a lot of clips on X recently of him talking about transgender children, and I don't know if that's going to play over too well in Texas, but I guess we'll have to wait and see what happens on that front. Next, we have U.S. responsible for deadly missile strike on Iran school. Preliminary inquiry says U.S.-Israel war on Iran, original title from TheGuardian.com, posted by Dr. 07, and I would agree that's not good, but ultimately, the U.S. can go away with whatever pretty much it feels like, and ultimately there's nothing you can do about it. The Iran school was right next to a military base, and that's probably why it got hit. But, Reddit only cares because the orange man's in power. If Barack Obama was in power, they'd find a way to downplay it. It's like when the U.S. military bombed a hospital in like Afghanistan under Obama, Reddit thought that was a big deal at the time, but now they kind of downplay that. And it just goes to show you, Reddit will justify, the U.S. is going to be carpet bombing the Middle East, regardless of which branch of the Unity Party is in power. And I'm sure if Kamala was the one who is in power right now and the missiles still hit the school, Reddit would probably be downplaying it and saying, oh, it's the military who's really responsible, not the president. But in reality, it's all just one big entrenched club of the elite class who rules over us. And as George Carlin famously says, it's a big club and you ain't in it. So I think they're all responsible. Every single member of the government, whether they're the president in the military or in like local office, I would say, because if you ultimately the federal government and the state and local governments, they're all just the same statist machine. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have Pentagon blocks photojournalists from Iran war briefings after unflattering Pete Hegseth photos from TheWrap.com, posted by Dracustein. And yeah, personally, I don't think the Pentagon should be blocking journalists from briefings, but if they want just by blocking whatever journalists they want to, ultimately there's nothing you can do about it, since they can control who and what journalists they allow in. That's why I personally think the Libertarian position is get rid of all the White House, the government journalism ties. No more White House press briefings. Because what's the point really? The point of White House press briefings, because it's obviously going to be the administration just jerking itself off, and the reporters just going to go away with whatever narratives they want to, and it just goes to show you that why even have that? People are just going to make whatever narratives they want to anyway. I see no reason why they need to have government journalists or independent journalists constantly asking government questions, and that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have conservative cable media broadcasting to millions tell viewers that talking about rising oil prices in America is Iranian propaganda, posted by Donald Key, and that's crosswords from the Mayor McCheese subreddit. And yeah, personally, I think, if they want to say that, that's fine. They should be able to say whatever they want to. But, a lot of conservative legacy media, like Fox News, they're just controlled opposition. They're all part of the legacy media complex that seeks to control the narrative. And, of course, Reddit cares when Fox News says propaganda like this. But, they don't care when their side does it, like with MS Now or ABC News. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have Democratic Socialist running for Senate in New Mexico. Matt Dodson is too pissed off to be bought off. Posted by Ragnarok KXG, and that's crosspost from the New Mexico subreddit. And yeah, personally, I don't know how likely it is he's going to win, especially against an entrenched incumbent like Ben Ray Lujan. But if he wants to say whatever he wants to say, I think that's fine. But ultimately, I've seen it time and time again that the Democrat talks themselves up on the campaign trail, and then they get in and end up being par for the course, or even worse, like with Kristen Sinema or John Fetterman. And I think that's important to remember as well. Next, we have Senator John Cornyn flips off on filibuster to pass Save America Act as Trump weighs endorsement from NBCNews.com, posted by Ninja Lover. And yeah, if he wants to do that, I think that's mostly out of self-interest to get Trump's endorsement. But ultimately, people are going to act in their own self-interest, and that's very much how people work. So I personally don't think he should be doing that just because he wants Trump's endorsement. But he should be able to justify whatever he wants to justify, and sometimes there's nothing you can do about it. Next, we have Ill-Fitted Shoes as the new show of loyalty to their king from thetimes.com, posted by Woke Boogeyman, and that's a story. Everyone's afraid not to wear them. Trump buys $145 shoes for his top men. And yeah, personally, if Trump wants to buy shoes and forces lackeys to wear them, ultimately Trump's usually just showing he can get whatever he wants, or he'll throw you under the bus and send all his goons after you. But ultimately, that's just how power works a lot of the time. It's whoever who if he wants something, he wants to find it, and he has a way to get it, he'll usually get it, and that's ultimately how power ultimately works, I would say. And that's my thoughts on that issue. So I think we're gonna wrap it up there. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye.